Hi guys, my name is Catherine Pabon. I am your host of Z-Files podcast. Today for our Behind the Ballot segment, we have a very special guest, Kelly Lombardo. Would you like to tell us why you're here, what you're running for, a little bit of an introduction for yourself?
Sure. Well, thank you first of all for having me.
Of course. Thank you for being here.
Yeah. I'm Kelly Lombardo. I am an attorney in Stroudsburg, and I'm running for judge of the Court of Common Pleas.
Amazing. So this is your first time running for an elect position. Like, you have so many years of being a prosecutor and like an advocate for the elderly. What made you decide to now run? Like, why is this the perfect time for you to pursue judgeship?
Good question. So I've been practicing for 16 years,
Yes.
and I got my start as a law clerk to a judge in our local court, and Judge Seabum. And I was her first law clerk when she took the bench in 2010.
Oh, that's exciting.
Yeah, it was great. And what I liked about it was it really introduced me to the court system, and I got to understand the ins and outs, or the daily routine of what a judge does and how they make an impact in the community. And so I did that for 2 years, and then I went on to being a prosecutor, like you said, and now I'm an elder law attorney. And so I've taken that experience with me, and I've reached a lot of people. But I feel that I've always been drawn to the court system and wanting to be involved and trying to impact as many people as possible. And so I feel that I have well-rounded experience, and we just learned that there are 2 judges that have left the court, or one is in the process of leaving, which opens up 2 spaces for a judge. And I feel like now is the right time. My children are a little older, which I'll tell you about, I'm sure.
Yes.
And it's just a good time in our life where we can really, I feel I can impact and do the most good for our community in acting in that position. So it just seems like the right time. I was born and raised here.
Yes.
I think that's a unique perspective that I can bring in that I born in East Stroudsburg, grew up in the same house for 28 years,
That's
and then I
amazing.
moved next door to that house. So I've been there for 42 years now, and I've watched Monroe County grow and change, and I think I understand what it needs and where it was and where it is now, and ways that we can help. So
you have very deep roots here.
I
You
do.
wanted to see it succeed and have justice for the members here, the residents.
it's important to me because I'm raising my children here.
Yeah,
So
of
I'm the
course.
4th generation, they're the 5th.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and my 90-year-old grandfather still lives here.
God bless, yeah.
Thank you. It's really great to have your family here and see what they've done for our community, learn from them, and hopefully instill that in my children.
Yeah. So I've read that you were deeply impacted by your experience as a juror in a local homicide trial. How did that moment shape your approach to justice and public service?
Absolutely. So I went to school after I graduated Pocono Mountain for forensic chemistry. I didn't really know I wanted to be a lawyer. And so I went and I did the science background. And as part of that, I had to do an internship with the DNA laboratory in Philadelphia, which was really great.
That's exciting.
Yeah, and I first went to court watching one of the scientists testify, and that was like the first experience with court that I ever had. And like 2 weeks later, I got a jury notice to serve back here in Monroe County.
I've never had one yet.
Never?
Yeah.
Knock on wood. So I came back to Monroe County, and it was a 2-week homicide trial. And the first assistant district attorney at the time was Mike Mancuso, and one of our he passed away, but the senior judge at the time, Ronald E. Viken, was presiding over the case. And so for 2 weeks, I was just enthralled by what was happening and watching the interaction between the attorneys, and Mike was so skillful, and the judge who was so knowledgeable, and it just opened my eyes to this experience. And afterwards, Judge Viken came up to me and said that this was probably going to be the most impactful and rewarding experience I've ever done, to do your civic duty. And I agreed with him, and I decided to go back, and I picked up a minor in criminal justice, and I learned a little bit more, and I went to law school.
It's amazing.
Yeah, and so now I see myself acting in that capacity, being able to do what he did and overseeing the court system. So
Would you say that he is someone that you aspire to be similar to, or someone that you just look up to?
absolutely.
Yeah.
He was a great man. And when I was a law clerk, I got to see him in action more, and just watching him, respond to people. And he was courteous and politeful, but he was, an advocate for the law. And that's what I want to aspire to do.
Yeah. So just like adjectives you would want to stand for your courtroom.
Integrity is the most important for me.
Yeah.
I think that you have to treat people with respect and do what you feel is right all the time.
Right.
I think you're the one that has to go home knowing that you made the correct decision, and that's based on the law. So integrity is huge. For me, experience is very important.
Yeah.
You need a judge who can be adaptable and do research and listen.
Skillful, yeah.
Absolutely. And compassionate. Not to say that that doesn't mean soft. That just means someone that when you come into the courtroom, that person's going through a really hard time in their life, and they're humans.
Yeah. And most times as people's residents, as their first experience in a courtroom, it's very intimidating.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you need someone who's going to explain, what's going on, treat them with respect, make sure that they have, what they need, a voice to speak, and treat people like people. So there's a difference between being, like I said, soft and
just empathetic.
Sympathetic or empathetic versus being compassionate, but also, being firm.
Right. It's amazing. Do you feel like you could balance all of that, or do you sometimes feel like there's times where you're not able to?
I feel I can balance it.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to say that, I've had practice with my 2 children. So I have 2 children. My daughter is 12, my son is 8. And so as a mom, I think you have to be compassionate, but also you're the mother. And so I have to guide these two children. And I think I do it in my daily life as, when I was a prosecutor and as an elder law attorney.
Yeah, those are very, you've had experience with, homicides, and then you go to vulnerable, elders. It's very different situations, so having to navigate and change, depending on how it is, being adaptable.
You're right.
Yeah.
Everyone comes to court with a different experience. And you have to be able to look at a child and an older adult differently than you would for anyone else that may come before the court.
Court of Common Pleas, how would that, what you as a judge, you are going to be doing specifically for your courtroom and different things, how will you navigate that with what is necessary for that and your experiences as a prosecutor now,
I think
I've
had
explained that well.
Yeah, I think I understand. I think I have very well-rounded or broad experience, ranging from helping children, especially people with special needs and disabilities, and older adults. That I've seen people from all walks of life, and you have to adapt not how you treat people, but how you engage with people.
Yeah.
And I think I've had that experience where, as a prosecutor, I was always of the mindset that, put yourself in the shoes of not just one person, but all the parties. So you're interacting with police officers, victims of crimes, even the defendant, and how their families will be impacted if that person were to go to jail. And so you have to, see how it affects everyone else. As an elder law attorney, how does a person who has a disability or cognitive impairment, something like that, what are their needs and how do you respond to them?
Yeah.
And I think it's just well-rounded experience that I can bring to the court. Again, that compassion comes into play, how to, make that person feel confident in what you're doing, but also feel comfortable in court.
So how would you feel you would navigate, so you could explain to future voters for May 20th, how would you navigate the complexities of civil cases?
I've had some experience in civil law. As part of what we do now, we are bringing civil complaints in the magistrate courts for collection matters. And, I don't think there's any attorney out there that knows it all. And in my practice, I chose to kind of specialize in certain areas, but it doesn't mean that I am not up to date on the law or that I don't know how to do the research to get that. So I feel like I would take what I know, especially as a criminal prosecutor, the interactions with the court and how to address a jury and how to do research and bring that with me no matter what type of law I did. When I was in law school, I was heavily involved in the civil law practice, or was it called the Harrisburg Civil Law Clinic. And I did that for quite a few years while I was there. You're teamed up with a practicing attorney, and they essentially give you a caseload. And amongst your classes, you get to come back and you get to help indigent clients or people that have very little resources or money. And I've helped them with divorces. I did some estate planning work. I've done workman's comp with them. And so you're learning all of those different areas, which just because I don't practice those in my everyday life, you know, I took those experiences and I can adapt to doing that. So again, going back to that well-rounded experience.
So as for me, if I'm being honest, this has been a very new experience. I'm not a law student. Journalism and political science.
That's great.
Is very different. So I've been able to have the privilege to really sit down with most of the candidates so far and learn exactly what the Common Pleas does for the community, for Monroe County. So for someone that's first time watching, that they haven't watched like the other interviews, how would you explain your role or your potential role for being judged for the Common Pleas?
I think it's important to understand the levels of courts that we have here in Pennsylvania, which is interesting. It's different in other states.
Right.
So we have the Magisterial District Court, which is kind of the court that handles when the case is first started. Not always. But it's not a court of record. So preliminary hearings are there for trial court, for criminal matters, landlord-tenant issues, things like that. But the court that I'm running for is the trial court level. And so some things that come up from the magistrate to trial court, but there's also matters that come directly in trial court. If you file a civil complaint, if you had a slip and fall case, personal injury, medical malpractice, all those things. And so it's the level of court where it's of record. You get to have jury trials. And that's the court that I feel I am most experienced in, because as a prosecutor, I spent years. Think about how many days are in a year and how many times you're in court. So, thousands of hours of courtroom experience in front of a judge interacting with the public. So that's the level of court that we're dealing with. And it's anywhere from family law matters, so divorce and custody. There's mortgage foreclosure cases, civil law, as I mentioned, criminal law. So it's a wide gamut of things. It's interesting.
Thank you for
Sure.
explaining that. So this is something very notable to mention, but in Monroe County, you're the first to prosecute a drug delivery resulting in death case under new legislation. What did that experience teach you about accountability, and what was something that you would feel is notable to mention about that experience?
So I'm glad you brought that up. I'm very
course.
proud of that.
Had to do my research.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. So I'll explain a little bit. When you're a prosecutor, all ADAs, assistant district attorneys, are on call for a 1-week period of time. And while you're on call, the police officers who are arresting defendants can call you at any time during the day with a question. And so one night I got a call at like 2:30 in the morning, and there was a drug overdose in Pocono Township, which is heartbreaking. But what was interesting about this particular case was the type of drug that he used was well known, in that they could trace it back to other cases where people had overdosed. And so back prior to 2011, if someone had delivered drugs to another person, they could be charged with drug delivery resulting in death if they intended to kill that person, which is hard to prove, because how do you prove intent to kill sometimes? In 2011, the law changed, and it was essentially removing the intent requirement and just having a reckless disregard for that person's life. So if I delivered drugs to you and I knew that you could overdose as a result of that, I could be held accountable for delivering those drugs to you. And that's what happened here. So this young man had passed away from overdosing on a brand of heroin that was laced with fentanyl. And the police were able to link it back to a particular drug dealer who was known to deal that drug. And so what that did was it allowed police officers to really hold the dealer accountable for the death of another, because they're bringing this dangerous substance into our community. And that case went all the way up to the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania. And they found that the law was accurate, and the case was upheld, and that person, it's sad to say, but is being punished for their actions. But I think it's a great deterrent for that line of work, bringing drugs into a community and distributing to another person.
Having new accountability for that.
Absolutely. And shortly after that, there was another one, and the person that overdosed, the victim, was a friend of mine from high school.
Oh no.
Yeah. So I did not prosecute.
Yeah, I
did not prosecute that case. But I was glad to see that we had this case that I had done that had gone all the way to the Supreme Court, and they said, this is good law. And so the other police department and another district attorney were able to proceed with that and then convict that person. So I'm hoping that it does hold people accountable for their actions. Now not to bring those dangerous drugs into our community.
Exactly.
Yeah, so one of the things that we're lacking here in Monroe County is the ability to help people who are addicted to drugs. And I have family members that were. And it's unfortunate that they're doing well now, but it wasn't because of Monroe County. They had to go someplace else to get treatment. So I would like to see, punishment for those that bring it to Monroe County, but help for those that are addicted to it.
Right. And how do you feel are some ways that you could really have a hand in tackling that issue?
There are other county courts that do have drug court, which we'd have to sit down and really research and find the resources to bring that to Monroe County.
Right.
But that would be something that I would be willing to look into, to dedicate some time, because there's such a need here. A lot of what I did in the prosecutor's office was drug cases. We had a lot of drugs coming through Monroe County because of, Route 80.
And just a rise of it. So.
Absolutely. And there's other programs that, the district attorney is working on. And I think it needs to be supported by our court so that we really can focus on, the needs of Monroe County and how to better our lives here.
Right. So drug aside, what are some other evolving natures of justice that you would like to bring forth?
Along the same lines, these specialized courts, mental health court, a lot of the time, and I've had cases like this where someone is charged with a crime, but they have underlying mental health. And sometimes mental health and drug use are
hand in hand. Yeah.
And so we need to address the underlying source. Jail is not always the answer.
Yeah.
Especially for our youth that are coming up. There has to be some type of rehabilitation.
Yeah.
Right. So there are county courts that do have drug court. There's another court that and obviously Veterans Court is a huge one.
Yeah.
We don't do enough here for our veterans. And there can be many more services available to them. Another one that's close to my heart is guardianships. Right now, when an older adult needs someone to make financial or medical decisions for them, that person who's making those decisions has to be held accountable for their actions to make sure that what they're doing is in the best interest of that older adult. And so sometimes, if an older adult doesn't have anyone, a court appoints a guardian for them. Sometimes it's a family member, sometimes it's a third-party company that we use. And so when you have a guardianship, you have to file these reports. Well, that's taking up the court's time to review those reports all the time. Right. If we had a separate guardianship services,
it goes faster.
It would take the liability and the time away from the judge, and would give someone a job, and then dedicate the time to really look into the reports to make sure that there's no abuse of power.
Because courts in general kind of move slow sometimes.
They are inundated with cases.
Yeah.
There's rules about how quickly something has to proceed through court.
There's a process and everything.
But if you think about Monroe County, for the population that we have 7 judges. And so their caseload is really complicated. And not every case is simple and can go right through. Think about a medical malpractice case, how long it takes and the effort of the attorneys to get that to court. A judge can only do so much with the caseload that they have.
Yeah.
So if we can take these programs and assist with that, things would move a lot smoother and a lot faster.
Do you think that there should be more open seats for judges in Monroe County, or do you think what we have is...
I think with our growing population that yes, we could probably use 1 or 2 more.
Yeah.
I'm not as familiar with what the caseload is for each judge right now. I know when Judge Seabum was in court, but that was back in 2010.
Yeah.
It was busy. We constantly had cases before us. That's why with her, I was able to go to court pretty much every day, whether it was a hearing or a trial or anything you could think of. We were in court constantly, which was a great experience for me.
Yeah, of course.
But it made her caseload very, very heavy.
And then your time in elder law and solicitor for the area agencies on aging gives you the insight into some of the a county's most vulnerable like populations, how would you ensure those voices are heard in your courtroom for everyone?
Mm-hmm. So I've been an elder law attorney for 10 years. I kind of overlapped a little bit when I was in the prosecutor's office. And about that same time, I took over as the attorney for the aging office. And so what that does is anytime that there's an older adult who is a victim of neglect, exploitation, financial abuse, they would call me. And if they didn't have a family member who could step up, I would file a guardianship petition for them. And so, most of my practice is older adults. A lot of what I do is private guardianships for family members that want to step up. And then the focus on the aging, and those are the really sad cases because those people don't have anyone to really step in and help them.
Support them.
So I think you need to be able to treat people obviously respectfully, but sometimes, when someone is going through dementia, they almost revert back to a childlike state. And so understanding how to treat a child and treat someone like that is pretty similar. I feel like I have that character where I can really make somebody feel comforted. And I think it's important for attorneys to be able to step up and make sure that those people have voices in court, which is why I love to be an advocate for that. Because when I go to court, I make sure that if they're my client, I'm representing them. And if I'm acting for the aging office, that they have an attorney who's speaking on their behalf. Because, if you don't have a voice yourself, somebody has to do it for you. So as a judge, I would make sure that those people that came before me had a voice, make sure they had an attorney who was competent and advocating for them. That's really important to me, whether it's a child, older adult, someone with disability, that voice to be able to say what they need and what they want out of the court system is something I want to guarantee.
Yeah. And then being in Monroe County for so long and like born and raised and everything, what are some like changes that you've seen, like besides like being in practice and everything, like even before that, what are some changes that you've seen like with justice, and then what are some things that you would like to see like devolve, or things that you don't really like how it is right now?
I think, there was a difference when I grew up around here versus how we are today. And I see that in raising my own children. When we came home from school, we played outside in the backyard and we rode bikes till it was dark. And it's a scary world that we live in. And so I think that we have to make sure that our communities are safe. We have a larger population than we did before.
Yeah.
And so, educating our children, making sure our schools are safe, those are important things that I feel are necessary. What would I change? Let's see.
Something that has like evolved that you like to put like a stop on it or make it devolve, or
I'm going to go back to the drugs. When I was little, marijuana was like the drug, and that was something that was like, ooh, that's taboo. We don't talk about that. And now it's methamphetamine and heroin.
Yeah.
And so, when my parents taught me about drugs is different than what I'm teaching my children. And then going into prosecution and pretty much doing a lot of the drug work, you see all of those things. I did a lot of gang cases, a lot of, the nasty drugs. I see where that's gotten worse over time. As the population grows, that's something that we really need to hit home and make sure that that's...
Do you think eventually like this county would become like urbanized, or do you think we would be able to hold on to our grassroots? So, like the population has really bounced a lot.
It has, and I think it ebbs and flows. It comes and goes, and we see that with, the market in homes. A lot of the time, it depends as it goes. People are commuting, to and from the city, because cost of living is a little lower here.
Yeah.
But I see as the county is, rich in some aspects, it's poor in other aspects. So I would say it's constantly up and down.
Okay, so you don't think we'll get like too up there? I
hope not. I think there's a lot of people that still want to keep it, a close-knit community. There's a lot of people that do really good in this community for everyone. fundraising and education and,
That is true.
Giving back. And I think, the more we reach to other people in our community about this, they'll see how great of a community we are and want to give back as well and keep us, keep our streets safe and our school districts safe and, educate our population.
And then having like your extensive background with like criminal prosecution, how do you, and also even like your elder background, like how do you balance a commitment to public safety and like with a judge's duty to uphold due process and fairness for defendants? Like how do you kind of step aside from like all your experience of like everything that you've done and being able to now take a step back and not kind of do what you used to do before?
Being a neutral party.
Yeah.
Like I said before, when I was a prosecutor, I always put myself in the shoes of everyone else, not just one-sided to protect the Commonwealth, but how it affected or impacted the defendants and his family. To me, we have to uphold the law.
And that's first and foremost.
First and foremost, absolutely. And it was back then too. Just because you're on one side versus the other doesn't mean that that goes away.
Yeah, of course.
The hard part for me will be not being the person to advocate because, I was very comfortable stepping in and saying, this is what our side needs, and this is my point. But I like that there's an opportunity now to listen to both sides and be the arbitrator in the middle,
It's
and
a
then
new
say,
challenge.
it is. This is the law, and I'm going to judge your credibility as to your side of the story. But the law is not going to change, and we have to uphold the law. So I think I'm going to be able to step aside and let somebody else advocate. And I think when I practiced, especially before the judges that are leaving, Judge Worthington and Judge Zulick, I appreciated the opportunity to advocate. They let me speak on behalf of the Commonwealth or my client.
Yeah.
So appreciating that, I want to make sure that that's something that I would do if I were a judge.
Right.
Giving people a voice and an opportunity to have their side of the story.
You want to uphold what you felt like that they were able to give.
Absolutely. They're great role models, and having the experience of actually practicing before them has kind of molded me into what I would like to be as a judge.
And then what differentiates you from all the other candidates? Like, to run for this position, you have to be qualified in some type of way. So what differentiates you specifically?
I think I have a lot of qualities. Being born and raised here, like I said, watching this community change, I understand the needs of it. And wanting to give back to the people that have shaped me into who I am, personally and professionally. My parents were really hardworking, my grandparents, and everyone, has their job or volunteer or continues to volunteer here, and raised me to do the same. So that's one aspect. Another is I'm a mom, and I'm relevant right now. I'm young enough to, be able to do this job for
it's a long
couple terms.
It's a long position.
Right. But I care about what happens because it's my community. My children are still young enough to be growing up here, and I want them to stay here.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I want them to stay here and raise their kids here and want this to be a place that they want to come back to. And I just think that well-rounded experience, I, if elected, would be the first prosecutor in Monroe County to be on the bench since Linda Wallach Miller, which is another point, female. So when Judge Worthington left at the end of December, there's only one judge, Judge Seabum, who is a female on the bench. And so I bring a female perspective as well. As a mother and a wife.
It's a different perspective.
It is. Not to discount the male perspective.
Of course.
But
both
I think
perspectives are needed.
think you need balance.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
Definitely balance. Even like for the candidates, there's mostly, I guess the majority would be males like running. So it even shows in that perspective as well.
Right.
So in the judicial races often fly under the radar compared to like a national race, of course, and everything. What are some things that you're doing, your campaign, to really push for that? Like to show people that this matters, for people who don't even vote and don't vote locally, but now they're voting for a judicial race that people don't even have most knowledge about.
You're right.
Or access to even like gain the knowledge of it. What are some techniques that you feel like you're doing differently than a regular political race?
I have a really great support system. I think from growing up here and my parents being so involved in the community, and my husband's family, he was born and raised here too. And so we have this network of people, and so word of mouth is really important. And so, telling someone and then they tell the next person and the next person, and it grows, is a great way to bring attention to this type of race. Because you're right, people don't necessarily come out, especially in a primary election, to vote unless it's a presidential, because they care about those important issues. And absolutely, you should be voting. But it's equally as important to vote for the local level, because things start at the local level and then they grow. Exactly. So word of mouth is important. Making sure that we're reaching, every demographic of people. So, which is wonderful why we're here, because your demographic is young, and my older adults and my clients, that's the other spectrum of it. So making sure that we're well-rounded. And then you do the things like, advertisements and commercials and things like that. But it's really getting to talk to people. You meet people all the time, and if you share an experience with someone and they like you, they're going to tell the next person and the next person. And so being transparent, open-minded, and being available is really important. Kind of grassroots as well, knocking on doors and making phone calls.
Canvassing and everything.
Exactly. But I would say, having that strong network of people to help is important.
And exactly what you said, like your family has been able to kind of build this for you, like having grassroots here and like having community that knows you personally and knows your character and what you will bring to a courtroom.
Exactly.
Yeah. And what would be something that you would like to add that you feel like you don't have the access to talk to everybody on a daily basis to tell them why you should be the judge? What are something that you would like to tell someone that really doesn't come up in conversation with a voter? You try to do all your research to get to know someone, but you don't really get to know them on paper. Exactly.
And if you could sit down and meet every single person and have coffee with them, I think once they meet you, they get an understanding of what's inside your heart and in your soul. Because, so you could go to my website and you could read about me, but it doesn't tell you, how I feel. I think people would find that I have character. And I've always tried to uphold that. And I tell my daughter, make sure, however you live your life, that you are kind to people and that you're building your character, because that's what people are going to judge you by. And you have to be able to sleep at night knowing that you're a good person.
Yeah.
So I would say that, come and get to know me, because I truly care about how we treat each other. Not to say that I couldn't be tough and, protecting our community as a whole, but people come to you on an individual basis, and each person is a person. And so, treat others how you'd want to be treated, kind of thing. But I think I would say, get to know us on a deeper level. Who's telling you what's in their heart and, what's the truth.
That was amazing. Is there anything else you would just like to add that I didn't get to touch base on that you really were hoping to talk about?
No, you did a fantastic job. Those were great questions.
Thank you.
I would just say, if you have an opportunity to research us and get to know us, everyone brings a quality to the bench.
Of course,
but you have to be able to picture yourself. Like, if you went to court, who would you want to be before? Who's going to make you feel like you're being heard, and who's going to take the time to research or understand the law and apply it to your specific case?
Right.
Who actually cares about, advancing justice, that kind of thing. So
that's amazing. Great. Thank you so much. Well, today we had a Behind the Ballot of Kelly Lombardo running for Court of Common Pleas in Monroe County. Thank you so much for joining me. This was Z-Files Podcast as your host, Catherine Pabon.
thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you.